Philippe Aghion, who was born in 1956 in Paris, France, did his PhD in 1987 in Harvard, United States. He's currently a professor at Collège de France and INSEAD in Paris, France, and at the London School of Economics and Political Science in the UK. Now, Philippe Aghion met Peter Howitt by chance at MIT in 1987, where they had neighboring offices. Creativity must have been present right at their first meeting, since they immediately started to work on a model with repeated patent races put into a macroeconomic framework. Their result pioneered the former study of innovation-driven growth through creative destruction. And their wonderful partnership is described by Peter Howitt in terms of complementarity, where the passionate Philippe Aghion, who started his career as a microtheorist, serves as the accelerator. Philippe Aghion, it will be a pleasure to listen to your talk. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. It's in all respects intimidating to be presenting now in front of this, of course, very prestigious audience, and after my friend Joel, with whom I agree on everything, but says things 10 times better than I would ever. So that so it's in all respects a big challenge. I would like to thank the Nobel Committee. It's been a blessing to be awarded this prize. And when I learned that I was sharing with Peter and with Joel, it was heaven to the square, because I could not imagine sharing it with people I'm more attached to, and you know, it was very fantastic that I share this prize with them. It was like awarding me twice. The other thing I want to say is that I would like to extend my thanks not only to the Nobel Committee, but to all my students and co-authors, and several of them are there, and several of my students became my co-author, are now renowned growth economists, and they are now the frontier. They are the new frontier. It's exactly the approach we push. The new generation, becomes the new frontier, and this prize is their prize. And I'll try to pay tribute to all my friends here as much as I can within 30 minutes. I just wanted to say something about so how this started. In my Schumpeter, in my students here was a curiosity. I mean, in an IO class with Richard Caves, you would hear about Schumpeter en passant, quoi. Or in a history of economic thought class, you would say, well, there is this guy Schumpeter, creative destruction, and that was a nice idea. The leading model in my youth was the solo neoclassical model, which is a very elegant model that tells you that you produce GDP output, final good, with stock of capital and labor, and that's the first equation. And the second equation tells you that you can increase the stock of capital over time by saving part of the output you produce and invest it in increasing your capital stock, and that's how you have the economy grow. But of course, Solow himself would make the reasonable assumptions of decreasing returns to capital accumulation, and from there you get that you could not explain long-run growth of per capita GDP without having something else that he would call technical progress. But Robert Solow would not tell you where technical progress is coming from. So that was the thing, but there is this guy, Schumpeter, and his idea of creative destruction. And there, so that's where it came, the thing. When I was a Harvard student, the thing with me is that I go very far, and the whole suspense is, will I fall off the cliff? Well, and certainly you have the flowers. I think it was for me when it was just put there to save my life. So the thing is that when I was a student at Harvard, my dream was to become to enter the Harvard Society of Fellows. It's a first-class postdoc. For 3 years you are paid like an assistant professor, and every Monday you have dinner with Amartya Sen, Bob Solow, leading physicists, and it's a very very prestigious thing. And so I was shortlisted to have an oral exam with them. And at dinner time, Solo, who was a senior fellow, was seated next to me at dinner, and he said, look, Philippe, you're a very nice guy, but you didn't quite understand the questions that were asked to you. So I realized that I had failed the test. And because I failed the Harvard Society of Fellows, well, I ended up at MIT, which is not the worst, fallback that can happen to you. And that's where I have my neighbor, who was Peter Howitt. And we would talk to each other, and it was in '87. Peter was visiting from Western Ontario for the year, and we started to talk to each other. And one day, I think I came to your office, Peter, and I said, why don't we try to, or we said together, why don't we try to write from scratch a model that would encompass Schumpeter's notion of creative destruction. And now I ask myself, my God, imagine that I had passed this bloody oral exam, at the Harvard Society of Fellows. I would not be here today. Obviously not. Of course, you never know the counterfactual, but I mean, I'm pretty sure that I would not be here today. So that's why failure, or seeming failure, because MIT is not the worst failure that can happen in your life. I mean, failure, or what you think is a failure in your life, can prove to be, your revival, your sauveur. Voilà. And that's voilà. I hope the joke is not part of my timing and I start the lecture. No, whatever. Okay. Okay. So here is a picture of young Schumpeter, who used to say he was good at 2 of 3 things, being a good lover, a good horse rider, and a good economist. And he said one of the 3 was not good. I won't go into this. And I won't tell you how Schumpeterian I am or not. Voilà. In that respect. Okay. So creative destruction is the process whereby new innovations displace old technologies. New innovations make old technologies obsolete. And as I told you, here is Peter. We will recognize him. And with Peter, we decided to write from scratch a growth model that would encompass 3 main ideas. And in fact, it intersects very much with what Joel talked about. The first idea is that long-run growth is driven by a cumulative process of innovation where each innovator builds upon previous innovations. The second idea is that innovations do not come from heaven. They result from entrepreneurial activities motivated by the prospects of innovation rents. When you innovate, you find, a better way to produce or new product, and that gives you rents for a while until you are superseded by subsequent innovations. And the third idea is creative destruction. New innovation displace old technologies, make them obsolete. And of course, what's interesting with this paradigm is that at the heart of the paradigm, there is a contradiction. On the one hand, you need monopoly rents, innovation rents, to motivate innovation activity. But on the other hand, yesterday's innovators are tempted to use their rents to prevent subsequent innovation because they don't want themselves to be subject to creative destruction. And regulating a market economy, it's a lot about how to manage this contradiction. And we will talk about secular stagnation, we will talk about middle income trap, whatever we talk about, you come across this contradiction that you have to manage. Okay, so that's the thing. You see, it's a lot, about all the time you have new talents, you have to let them grow, but of course you have to make sure that once they've grown, they will not prevent subsequent talents from coming and growing. And how you make that happen? Okay. So I will just argue it since we were awarded for a model. I should show at least a few equations, because otherwise you feel I'm a complete crook. So really, in a nutshell, the Aghion-Howitt model goes, oops, alors no, that's not good. That's right. Alors, in a nutshell, what you have is that you have a final good, which is produced with capital Y, produced with some intermediate input, which is small y, okay? And A that you have here is the quality of that means the productivity of the intermediate input currently used in the production of the final output, okay? The intermediate input itself, the small y, is produced with labor, and for simplicity, let's assume it's 1 for 1. 1 unit of labor gives 1 unit of intermediate inputs, therefore small y would denote both the amount of intermediate input, but also the amount of labor used in manufacturing the intermediate input. But labor has another, growth in this model comes from quality improving innovations. You see, if the previous state of the art intermediate input was of quality A, after a new innovation, you produce a new intermediate input of quality gamma A, where gamma is greater than 1. And gamma is the size of the innovation. And that's why the new is better than the old. And that's why the new displaces the old. That's the cube, you know, of the beautiful poster that we saw. Okay? So now, finally, I told you that you produce with labor intermediate input, but there is another use to labor, is to produce innovation. We assume a Poisson process, that's a bit like technical, but I will just say if you use Z units of labor currently in R&D, then a new innovation will arrive during the current unit of time at rate lambda Z, where lambda is the productivity of research. So you have two uses of labor, to produce small y, 1 for 1, and to produce innovation, okay? So now the model revolves around two equations, because we said Solo had two equations. We need two equations. If we have three, we fail, okay? So if you want to pass the parsimony test, two equations. The first equation is a labor market clearing equation, stating that labor supply is fully absorbed between manufacturing labor small y and research labor small z. That's the labor market clearing. There is no unemployment here. Second equation, it's an arbitrage, it's a research arbitrage equation stating that in equilibrium, individuals are indifferent between either producing manufacturing and getting a wage, or working in R&D to produce a new innovation. And together, these two equations lead you to miraculously an equilibrium amount of R&D that will depend on all the parameters of the model. The productivity of research, the higher the productivity of research, the more R&D you will have in equilibrium. The higher the size of innovation, the higher the R&D in equilibrium. And once you have the Z, the growth rate is simply lambda Z, that's the frequency, times the log of the size. And the day we got this, I told Peter, we have it. Didn't I? This day, it looks very stupid, but I said, Peter, we are on to something. My God, this is a beauty. We decompose the Solo residual. We have what was there. So I'm always being very excited, and Peter has always been moderating me. I think I was jumping around. People were complaining at MIT because I was too French and too loud. Yeah. Okay, so that was, I think this has been, the most exciting day in my life. Voilà, the lambda z log of gamma. I said, whoa, God. Bon, okay. So what this tells you is that growth is positively correlated first with the turnover rate and with the quality of innovation gamma. And that tells you about US versus Europe. US has a higher rate of innovation than Europe, but you could also say that US has a higher rate of turnover. There is more job creation, job destruction in the US than in Europe. There is more firm creation and firm destruction in the US than Europe. That means that there is a higher lambda z in US than in Europe. But in addition, US, they do breakthrough innovation, higher gamma. In Europe, we are incremental mid-tech. They are breakthrough high-tech. They have a higher gamma, and that's why US is growing faster than Europe. And the model directly speaks to that. Voilà. Okay, so let me entertain two main extensions of the model. Well, I'm here. So just let's some water. Oh. So the first extension is that what I call the step-by-step innovation. One counterfactual prediction of the Aghion-Witt model is that when I have the Z there, the alpha, which is a measure of competition, a bigger competition would always give you less R&D, because innovation in the basic Aghion-Witt model is always done by outsiders. They go from zero, if they don't innovate, to a value. And anything that would reduce this value, like more competition, would therefore reduce their incentive to innovate, and therefore would reduce the rate of growth. So the model had a counterfactual prediction that competition is bad for growth. But there had been work done by, John with Blondel, Nickel, on microdata from UK in particular, saying that if you had any correlation between competition and productivity growth, should be a positive one. You tend to have more productivity growth when you have more competition. So you had to reconcile that. And so let me just go there. So in fact, the thing is that what we did, why did we have this counterpart prediction? Because in our model, it's only outsiders that would innovate. It's always people from outside. Currently, Joel is the current innovator. I come from outside, I leapfrog Joel, I oust Joel, and I become the new producer. And I go from 0 to the value of the next innovation. And competition reduces that value and therefore reduces. But in fact, in practice, that's not the way it works. You have always, in any sector of the economy, leaders and laggards. And it's not that the laggards leapfrog right away the leaders. They have to catch up step by step. And I need many steps to catch up with Joel before I can become a leader. So I will innovate to catch up with Joel. But Joel may want to innovate to increase the gap between him and I, to make it harder for me to catch up with him. Okay, I always have this, parabola. Okay, so let me drink more water. I get very dehydrated very quickly. You are a classroom. You are all equally good. Suppose there is the top of the class and the bottom of the class. And suppose I open the door, voila, exactly. And I let a very good element into the room. What will happen? The top of the class will work harder to remain the top of the class. But the bottom of the class, which is already discouraged, will be even more discouraged when I let this good element in. It's the same for firms. The blue line are firms that are close to the technological frontier in their sector. They react positively to more competition by innovating more and growing more. Those are the frontier firms. They innovate to escape competition. But those who are way below, which are the orange firms, they are already discouraged. When I let a good element into the room, they will be even more discouraged and they will do less. And so competition has very different effect on innovation by leaders and laggards. And if you look at the overall effect of competition on aggregate growth, it's an inverted U. And I'm sure that Peter will have things to say on the inverted U. But another thing which is also interesting, the more developed an economy is, the more blue firms you have compared to orange firms. So therefore, that tells you already that the more advanced an economy is, the more growth enhancing, on average, it is to have more competition. Okay? So that's the first extension of the basic model. The second one is firm dynamics. And that's really Clété, Kortum, Ufuk, Pete, and you are all here. And we've done work with John and everybody. So here, we can talk about firm growth. It's not about, not only we can accommodate heterogeneity, that you have entrants and incumbents and leaders and laggards, we can talk about firm growth. And that's what really the Clété, Kortum model did and all what the model that followed. Here I represent a firm with 4 lines. So on each of these lines, that's how well the firm is doing. The A is the quality on each of the 4 activities of the firm. How can the firm grow? The firm grows by doing creative destruction on another line. So for example, suppose this other line goes right there, is current A. This firm will turn it into gamma A. It will drive out the current producer on that line, and the firm will become a 5-line firm. That's how you grow. You see, I have the ambassador in front of me. You are currently producing. I innovate upon you. I grow at your expense. But it could be that it's the opposite. On one of my lines, my ambassador does better than me and drives me out, and then I shrink. How do you enter in this model? You are nobody, and you innovate upon one of the lines. You become a one-line firm. How you exit? You are one-line firm. Somebody innovates upon you, and you drive out. It's very, and we see what's nice is that with this model, you can account for several facts. First, of course, you have a lot of small firms, but many few large firms, because to become large means to have survived a lot of threat of being, shrunk, you see, by no entrance. So you have, that model would tell you right away that you have many small firms and very few large firms. Is exactly what we observe. Another prediction is that they would tell you that so the first, this graph is Ufuk and Aksigit-Kerr. This one is Pitt and Shanghai-Say. We tell you that if you have a relationship between age and size, should be an increasing relationship, because I start being a one-line firm. But then I may grow, not grow, but in expected terms, there is a positive correlation between age and size. Why is it steeper in the US? And US pre-Trump. I don't know now, okay? I will tell you about bad joke I did with Trump. Is because when you are a good innovator in the US, you get financing, you get venture capital, institutional investment, so you can grow more. And therefore, you can evict those who are not as good as you are. So those who remain and survive are also better. So not only is because you get more financing, but it's because of that, those who survive are intrinsically better. And that's why you have this tip. It's much less true in India or in France, you run out of brothers-in-law, you stop growing, okay, or whatever. But France is more like here. But and that's the second fact. And the other thing is that the exit rate is higher for small firms or young firms than large firms. Why? Because when you are a one-line firm, it takes one creative destruction for you to be evicted. When you are a 2 or 3 size firm, it takes 2 or 3 creative destruction to be evicted. That's why the rate of exit is larger for young and small, and that's exactly what you observe. So you can see this model tells you firm dynamics, heterogeneity. You can really confront the model with microdata. And that's what became very exciting, is the dialogue between theory and empirics, the back and forth continuously between data and the model. And that's the exciting part of this adventure, okay? So how long do I have? 1 minute? 10? But minus the jokes. The jokes were 5 minutes. You count the jokes, huh? Yeah. Let's make a deal. Now I get water, and I have more time. Yeah. Okay. So I would like now, what I would like to do, I think I have the wrong pointer, that doesn't help. What I would like to do now is to say, well, using the lens of this paradigm, we can do various things. In particular, we can try to elucidate historical enigma. And already one big enigma is the industrial takeoff. So I won't do, what has been so fantastically done by Joel in his lecture. I will, and the other thing you can do is to rethink capitalism, okay? Nothing less, quoi. So there are 2 enigmas I would like to talk about. One is secular stagnation, okay? And you see, so there are various papers that use a version of the Schumpeterian model, and those are the 2 papers I want to mention. So I will start by the joint work with Antonin Bergeau, Timo Boppart, Pete Clino, and Yui Lee, and then I'll talk about Ufuk, Aksigit, and Sina Ates. So what you can see here is that if you look at the average yearly TFP growth rate in the US, it has soared up between 95 to 2005, and then it went down a lot. Okay, that's maybe part of the secular stagnation, enigma. But what's interesting is that at the time where growth soared up, you had a big increase, an acceleration in increase in concentration. That's the work that John, who is here, has done with Otter, Katz, Dorn, and I remember whenever I have a co-author, I don't know, the co-author raise their hand. Well, you see at the time of where you had the growth soaring up here, you also had an acceleration in concentration. It's true in services, but also in other sectors. And you can see that also in markups. markups, you can see the average markup in the US economy going up, but not so much because within firms it went up. The blue curve is not upward sloping. It's the black curve. It's a composition effect. Those superstar firms, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, those firms were high markup firms. And through merger and acquisition and all kind of things, they became tentacular. And those were the high markup firms. And that's why the average markup went up. It's a composition effect, okay? And in fact, you see, what's interesting is that those are these large firms that had the increase in establishment, the rising establishments. Instead of being the small firm that increased most the number of establishments, it was these large firms that expanded the most. And that's why the red curve shows is the firm with more than 10,000 employees that expanded more than the other firms, okay? The problem with that is that it ended up discouraging new entry. You see what I mean? And that's the Schumpeterian conundrum. You had these large superstar firms. They harnessed the power of IT. Okay, they knew how to use IT better than others. They grew large. They initially pushed the growth process. But eventually, by becoming so tentacular, so pervasive, they ended up discouraging new entry. And that's why, because competition policy, and we go back exactly to what Joel was saying, is that the institutions here, in that case, competition policy, did not adapt to IT. We should have had a much more dynamic competition policy. That's what our friend Richard Gilbert from Berkeley and others argue. Okay, that's the problem we had. And in addition, if you move now to Axigé and Attes, they look at the same secular stagnation phenomenon using the step-by-step innovation model, where you have laggards that need to catch up step by step with leaders. And what Ufuk argues with Sina is that, in fact, the leaders, by not sharing data or by doing other kind of things, they made it harder for followers to catch up with them. And therefore, they increased the gap between them and the followers, you see? And you can see here that the technological gap between leaders and followers, the distribution of gaps, you see, is moving to the right between 1980 and 2010. Increasingly, the gap between leaders and followers increasing a lot because they didn't share data, they didn't share knowledge. And the result of that is that consequently, the leaders' rents have gone up because the production became more concentrated in the hands of the leaders, and that's what you have the markup going up. And at the same time, entry of new firms or laggards innovation was discouraged, and that's why you have less entry. And you can see how the Schumpeterian framework and its extension can really tell you something about creative destruction and about the fact that you need the appropriate institutions to harness the power of technology. Okay, how long do I have? I'm almost done, almost done. 5? Oh my God, yeah, I want to talk about middle income trap. Some people say I'm anti-MIT and middle income trap is MIT, but not at all. I owe a lot to MIT. So we want to talk about the fact that some countries start growing and then they stop growing at some moment. So for example, if you look at the Soviet Union, that's Ufuk's graph, you see that Soviet Union is growing a lot, and at some moment they stop growing. And that's why they get the middle income trap. You see? And so that's very much based on work I did with Fabrizio Zilibotti and Arena Semoglu. We say, well, you have two ways to generate productivity growth. Either you catch up with the technological frontier, or you innovate upon yourself. You grow from A to gamma A, where gamma is greater than 1, which is the size of innovation. And the policies that are good for catching up are not exactly the same as the ones that are good for growing frontier. China, for example, for 30 years has been growing by catching up. For catching up, they needed to absorb technology transfers from elsewhere, to have a good education policy, to open up and take advantage of technology transfers. Competition, for example, I told you, was much more important to grow at the frontier. You see, so the policies that are good for catching up are not the same. When you are about frontier, you need much more creative destruction. You need much more, liberalized market for products and labor. You need venture capital. You need institutional investor. You need Draghi. You need all what Draghi is talking about, okay? And so here is a case of Korea. And you see that Korea was growing very fast after the Korean War, after South Korea I'm talking about. But then the growth rate went down. And North Korea, it's electrocardiogramme et plat, as we say in French. Okay, flat electrocardiogram. So what happened in Korea is that during the catching up phase, you had the growth of conglomerates called the chaebols. I don't know if there are Koreans among you, because I'm very bad at pronouncing Korean. You know, it's not my best thing. The chaebols, not only did they discourage entry of non-chaebol firms, but they put pressure on the Korean government to not move from policies that were good for imitation into policies that were good for frontier innovation. It took, in fact, the crisis of the late 90s to weaken a bit the power of the chaebols, for more competition to happen and for growth to, to pick up again a bit. Okay? But now, let's keep going. Because Japan is another, it's not a middle income, but it's still subject to the same syndrome. Japan grew up a lot through catching up between 1945 and the 1990s, but then they fell into the same thing, because in Japan, it's not the chaebol, they call them keretsus. The keretsus were big conglomerates that, again, not only discouraged non-keretsus firms from entering the market, but also, didn't favor, were able to prevent the government from moving into more pro-competition policy. But the worst of the worst is us, Europe. That's the worst to come. So I think that should not be counted at the time, because it's for Europe that I do that, and it's a big plea. I represent here Europe, EU area per capita GDP compared to US per capita GDP. And you see, of course, we had a big fall with the war, because in particular, a lot of capital was destroyed, okay? And you see, between 1945 and the mid-80s, we caught up, Europe caught up with the US in terms of per capita GDP. But since the mid-late 80s, again, we are losing in terms of per capita GDP to the US. And that's the problem. And again, it's the thing, we were good at catching up, because first, thanks to the Marshall Plan, we rebuilt our capital stock. Also because we had a good education level, we could catch up with the technological revolution that had occurred in the US in the 1920s. That was catching up growth. But now the problem is that we have to do frontier innovation. As I told you, we are stuck in Europe into mid-tech incremental, and they do high-tech breakthrough in the US, okay? So if you look, for example, and this should really worry you, if you look at particularly at the right-hand side, and you look at the high-tech patents, the US is in red, China is in blue. So when I went to China, I said, here you are. So everybody was, woo, woo, woo. Okay, great. Voila. But Europe, we are in green. You see the thing? We need to wake up. We need to wake up. And we need the Draghi. What Draghi says, we need a truly single market for goods and services. We need to have, a proper financial ecosystem of innovation with venture capital and institutional investors. In that respect, Sweden is ahead of everybody with respect to, because a fraction of your tax, as far as I know, is used to feed pension funds. That's what's in the Draghi report. Tell me if I am wrong there. But you found a way to develop institutional investors, but we are well behind the rest of Europe. And we need DARPA. We don't have the equivalent of the Defense Advanced Project Agency, which is a pro-competition way to do industrial policy. Well, I remember a discussion with Anders Borg. Whenever I would pronounce the word industrial policy, he would say, whoa, I believe in competition, therefore never. That's a bad word. As if I have said, whatever, I don't say anything. So, and now people are warming up to the idea the US is doing it, China is doing it. They try to reconcile competition policy and industrial policy. We need to do it in Europe, because otherwise, we are declining. Okay, and that's the front page of the World Development Report that Ufuk and Germith Bill was very much, the did on middle income trap and creative destruction. And this middle income trap I think is a very, powerful idea. So let me end up with rethinking capitalism, and then I'm done. Okay. So, US does poorly on inequality and social protection. I mean, I don't want to be sick in the US, unless I'm wealthy, okay? And but Europe does poorly on innovation. If you look, for example, I'm stopped. Is it cool? Where am I here? Now it's good. Yeah. If you look at Gini index, which is a global measure of inequality, you see that it's higher in the US than in Germany, France, and the Scandinavian countries. If you look at poverty rate, it's higher in the US, France, and than the Scandinavian countries. There is the death of despair of Anne Case and Angus Deaton. If you look at the death rate of unskilled middle-aged in the US, it has gone up a lot because people get stressed. They fear to lose their job because they lose entitlement to health services. They take opioids, sleeping pills, they eat too much pizza, they die, okay? And I love pizza, but be careful, don't overconsume, okay? Okay, so that's the US socially. Now, when it comes to innovation, there, of course, the picture is very, rosy for the US. If you look, for example, at the flow of triadic patents per million inhabitants, patents, which are registered in the US Patent Office, Japanese Patent Office, and European Patent Office, so there's a good patent. You see, the US is above everybody, you see. And so what you would like to have, and again, I'm doing the same mistake there, and I'm done. You would like to combine the good side of the American model, innovation, with the good side of the European model, protection and inclusiveness. Some people believe it's an either or. If you choose to be more innovative, it has to be at the expense of inclusiveness and protection. If you choose to be more inclusive and protective, it has to be at the expense of innovation. And I believe there are at least three policies I want to advocate. Flex security, education and competition that can make you both more innovative and more inclusive. You can get on both, you can win. Let me just say very briefly why. Alexandra Roulet, who is here, she looked at the labor market in Denmark and she compared the evolution of the health of a worker in a firm that closes down to the evolution of the health of a similar worker in age, education, experience in a firm that does not close down. No effect of losing your job in Denmark compared to the control group on purchase of antidepressants, anti-anxiety, sleeping pills. No effect. And again, I do the same mistake because I press always the wrong. No effect on the probability to have a heart attack, and no effect on mortality. They found this flex security system. It's a way to make creative destruction work better and to protect. What is it? In Denmark, when you lose your job for 2 years, you get a very high fraction of your salary. The state retrains you and helps you find a new job. I believe in this system. I think we should all emulate. I think Sweden, you're maybe close to it. France, we are very far from it. And I advocate flex security. Particularly with AI, there will be job creation and job destruction. You need flex security to make people accept socially the AI revolution. So that makes it will boost the innovativeness because it will make creative destruction work better, and it will also not be at the expense of protection. The second thing is education. Here I'm looking at the probability of inventing as a function of the parental income. And you see you have this J curve. You are much more likely, the left-hand side is US on current data, the work by Bell, Shetty, Jaravel, Petkova, and Van Reenen, and John, Xavier and John are here. The second paper is by Ufuk, John Grigsby, and Nicholas. There should be an A there. That's the same on historical data US. And this is joint work that we did with Ufuk, Haitinen, and Toivainen on Finnish data. And you see that you are much more likely to innovate if your parents are in the high income bracket. We were very surprised about Finland, because in Finland they have a very good education system that I would like France to emulate, and it's free from kindergarten to PhD. So how come they have this J curve? And we tried to elucidate this enigma, and we saw that in fact the higher earning parents in Finland are also more educated parents. So they give knowledge and aspirations to their children. So when you control for education, the curves become the red curve, much flatter. But still, it doesn't completely solve the enigma, because if the school is so good, why should parents make such a difference? But in fact, the reform in Finland, they had a big reform in 1970. It's in 1970 that they made the school system comprehensive. The big problem is the lost Marie Curie, as Xavier calls it, or the lost Einsteins. We have many smart kids born to poor families. The parents cannot give them the knowledge and aspirations to become inventors. And if you improve the schooling system, you will make more innovators and more inclusiveness. And that's what they did in Finland. You can see that we compare here the probability of inventing of a child in Finland that goes to school after the reform of 1970 versus those who went to school before. And you see that the reform of 1970 lifted a lot, you see, the probability of inventing for children whose parental income was in that zone. So really, the reform of 1970 in Finland increased the number of reduced the number of lost Einsteins. It made the economy more innovative and more inclusive. I'm done. Competition is the last one. I told you that you had a big problem in the US, but with this decline in productivity growth, and it had to do a lot with the superstar firms discouraging entry. If you reform competition policy in the US, you make it harder to do merger and acquisition. You look at the effect it would have on future innovation, future entry, and you force sharing data, you reform competition policy, you will have more innovation because new entrants will be able to come and innovate, but also we know that entrant innovation is good for social mobility. That's work we've done with Blondel, Axigit, Bergeau, and Hemus, and Ufuk and David are here. And we showed that there is clearly, why is it that more entry in entrant innovation? Because creative destruction is a source of social mobility. Creative destruction is about the new replacing the old. It's a fantastic source of mobility. If you liberate, if you reform competition policy, you will make your economy more innovative because more new talents can come in and innovate, but also entrant innovation boosts, through creative destruction, social mobility. And so at the end, creative destruction can deliver sustained and inclusive growth and prosperity, provided appropriate policies are put in place. AI has considerable growth and employment creation potential, but again, appropriate policies and institutions need to be put in place. Thank you very much.
So much. It was fantastic.